Welcome back to the podcast. Do you know that your negative emotions actually can really help you? They're telltale signs to things you need to be paying attention to. And often we think negative emotions are things we need to fix or remove, but Yvonne Caputo is here to talk to us about how we can use our negative emotions to really be our help. Welcome to the Balance Code Podcast, a place for high achievers to step outside the hamster wheel of day-to-day life and start learning tools for more balance. I'm your host, Katie Russler, and I will be guiding you on this journey of discovering your balance code. So, Yvonne, thank you so much for talking with us. I'm really looking forward to the stories you have to share and the ideas you have, because I think in today's world, we're taught to fix when we have negative emotions. Don't feel them, eat them, drink them away, whatever it might be, right? But you're really coming at it from a standpoint of actually, you need these. Don't make them go away. You need these. So first, share with us a little bit about yourself, and then let's dive into this topic.
Okay. I am what I call deliciously semi-retired. I still practice psychotherapy on a very small scale. I'm a former teacher. I'm a therapist. I was a business consultant. So I've done a lot of different things, and now I can say I'm the author of 2 books.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's exciting.
Thank
So
you.
Multi-passionate woman, right? I'm going to be here, I'm going to do a little this, I'm going to do a little that. I love that.
Well, my path has always been, I've been led somewhere, and that was a new career. And then I was led somewhere else, and that was a new career. When I met and married the man of my life, I moved to southeastern Pennsylvania and couldn't find a teaching position. So, thank God I had a second master's degree in clinical psych. I ended up doing employee assistance work as both a counselor and a trainer. And then a CEO of one of the organizations I worked with said, Yvonne, would you come and run our human resource department in a retirement community? So I've had this, I think, lucky path of having careers that I've really loved.
That's so cool. And it's cool how it just all sort of appeared from whomever or whatever, right? It was always the next step, the next stepping stone. That's really cool. Well, let's get into the topic for today. So tell us your viewpoint about negative emotions.
When I do training on stress, I ask people to close their eyes, think of a very stressful situation, raise their hand when they're there, so I know, and then scan their body. Where do they feel it? And then the answers will be in my chest, in my head, my jaw is tight, my stomach. And that reminds me to say things like, I can't stomach this, it's too much to shoulder, my heart isn't in it. Because one of the things I believe about emotions is they reside in our body. And the more attuned we are with our body, the more likely we are to recognize what that emotion is. The next step in this process is to name the emotion. Anger, frustration, anxiety, joy. And when it comes to the negative emotions, I've told people, my clients as well, those are internal stop signs. So, Katie, play along with me.
Okay, let's go.
You are in your car and you're driving. What do you do when you get to a stop sign?
I stop.
And what's the reason that you do that?
Yeah.
What's the reason you do that?
What's the reason I do that? Because 1, it's the law. 2, I want to make sure I don't get hit. So I'm checking around, making sure it's safe for me to go.
All right. So internal stop signs are meant for you to do the very same thing. So the most important thing is once you name that negative emotion, and by the way, when you do that, you're connecting with the prefrontal cortex in your brain, which is the thinking and reasoning part, then say, okay, to proceed safely, what am I angry about? And what do I do with that anger so that I can live according to my values? So my take on negative emotions are they're our best friends. They are there to guide us through the world. but they can't guide us if we don't recognize and name them. So that's how I see it. So if I'm angry, what am I angry about? Is it something that's a big deal? Is it a hill to die on? Or is it something that's a little niggly and it just doesn't mean that I need to do anything with it except recognize it.
Right.
So that's kind of the way that I view it and the way I teach it.
And I like that you give us an analogy we can picture, right? Like it's the stop sign and you're looking around, but that our emotions are always speaking to us. And if we don't have the awareness, then that's when they get the best of us. But when we have the awareness and when we name it, then we start to get to what is the trigger? Is this real? Like you said, is this it? Like, is this the line I'm putting in the sand? Or am I just annoyed? And I value the fact that you're saying like, hey, typically, especially anger, right, has so many other emotions attached to it. Then you stop to pay attention to what those are.
Right. And when you were talking in the beginning, if we bury them, if we don't recognize them, if we avoid them, we're likely to go through that stop sign, get hit, and wonder what in the world went wrong. And what went wrong is that when we got to the stop sign, we didn't look both ways. We just went right straight through. So here is this internal mechanism that I believe we were given as human beings to keep us safe.
Yeah, definitely.
If I think about this, if I'm out on my street and I notice that a 18-wheeler is careening down the road, I'm going to get triggered. And that's a good thing. That trigger is, what am I going to do to avoid what could happen? All right. So the triggers which produce fight, flight, freeze, or play dead have been given to humans for all of the centuries and eons that we have been walking this earth to give us a way to be safe. But I don't know what it was like for you, but growing up as a female, I wasn't allowed to be angry.
Mm-hmm.
If I cried, and I was ultra sensitive, still am, I was told to go to my room until I could get myself together. There was no, what's going on, Yvonne? What's happening? What are you feeling? And why are you feeling it? And let's talk through how you can handle it.
That's not through it. Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a generational issue that many parents are trying to break for their kids now, whether, whatever gender your child is, because you're exactly right. Generations before us were not comfortable with negative emotions, and sometimes not even comfortable with happy emotions. Let's be honest. There's some who are like, I need you to tone down your joy. This is too much. You're celebrating too much. So it is a generational issue that you're saying like, hey, no, we have to shift this. So what if somebody who's listening grew up in a home where emotions weren't safe, stable, allowed? How do you help them to go, okay, no, actually your emotions are safe. Maybe other people's weren't growing up, right? But your emotions are safe. How do you help them get reconnected?
Well, first of all, always ask, name it. And sometimes my clients can't name it. So I have a chart with all the list of emotions. And so I'll go to ask them to go down and pick out the one or pick out the ones that would be the ones that they're feeling and to say them out loud. And then we do what we just did. All right, so what's the reason you're feeling that? Okay, what's it telling you? What's it telling you to do?
Like giving a voice to it.
Just giving a voice to it. The interesting part, because I'm so interested in neurobiology, is that there are studies which show us the minute that we voice the negative emotion, anger, frustration, hopelessness, grief, a neurotransmitter is released in the brain that is anti-pain, and anti-negative feeling.
Wow.
So we are literally giving ourselves a shot of what I call a good neurotransmitter,
Yes.
a good brain chemical. And this is something that has recently been discovered. The story behind, at least the research I've read, is they had interns in MRI machines.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked the interns to think about a very, very stressful day. And then they said to the interns while they're in the tube, don't tell us what the experience was. Name the feelings that were associated with it. When they did, they watched the brain light up in certain areas that let them know that these neurotransmitters were being produced. So the sheer naming of it is a good brain thing to do. And going back to something that you said originally, I lost a brother in 1978. He was 26 years old. Perhaps 20 years later, the rest of the family was on a great big houseboat in the middle of this gorgeous lake. And we would pull up to the shore, tie off, and there were woods all around. Mom and I were walking in the woods. And she's looking at the leaves, and there's the crunch under her feet and the blue sky. And she teared up and said, Mark, my brother, would have loved this. Out of her mouth next came, oh, shut up, Teddy. You should be over this by now.
Oh,
My mother was greatest generation, all right? The generation that didn't do those kinds of things. And I said to her, I said, no, Mom, you don't ever lose a child and get over it. And it's wrong. It's a myth for us to think that that's what we're supposed to do. But that's what she had been taught.
yeah. And that giving her permission in that moment to continue to feel it, even if it just planted a seed, I think is quite powerful. And it's exactly what we have to do for ourselves. For those of us who really struggled to be comfortable with negative emotions, like, no, you get to feel this. And I think grief is a great example. The listeners who are regular listeners know that my book is on grief. My work is in grief often. And that's it exactly, is that grief has such a negative connotation and a time limit to it, right? Like, oh, you're grieving and you should be over it by now. And none of those are true. But it's like,
Exactly.
that is to name it.
I was very close to this brother. And recently I was doing something, listening to relaxing music while I was doing stretching after my exercise. And a particular song came on that was very tied to my brother and I. And I just started to weep. Now, what I knew was that my tears were normal. What I knew was that I was having a reaction to the music. What I knew was there was nothing wrong with me. Another example of this is that I interviewed my father for my first book. It's called Flying with Dad. And we got to the part where he started to tell me what his nightmare was when he came home from the war. And his B-24 was going down. He couldn't get up. There was a passageway he was having to pull himself through, and it was lined with stainless steel, and he couldn't get purchase. He couldn't pull himself through. That nightmare lasted 3 years. He dug channels in the mattress. It went away, finally. But when Dad told me about it, I said, your nightmares are normal. He said, what do you mean? And I explained it to him, how the brain latches on to the horrific things that he witnessed during World War II. And that what his brain was trying to do was to try to work through that trauma via the nightmare. But what he didn't know was it was normal. He came home and He walked around town and he saw all of these other men who had been soldiers. They seemed to be okay.
Mm.
So he said, there's something wrong with me. So we talked about grief. We talked about trauma. And one of the most beautiful things in my life was listening to my dad and listening to his shoulders drop to find out 60 years after the fact that what he was processing was a normal part of what he witnessed. Again, greatest generation, they didn't have that vocabulary, they didn't have that understanding. And so they carried, there's something wrong with me, their whole lives, when they were feeling and experiencing a normal part of what any of us would have experienced had we witnessed the same thing.
Right. Living in Germany, and in Munich in particular, right? It's interesting to watch the generational issues with emotions here and, perspective taking, right? There's always, well, the mindset of like, well, nobody died, so I should be able to deal with this or suck this up, because there is that mentality of the losses that have happened here. And you don't, like, why can't you deal with this? This is nothing compared to what I've gone through, right? There's always sort of this like, tough it up, tough it up, tough it up. And there's this calloused exterior to many here because of that like trauma response that's like generationally passed on. We got the epigenetics going on of just like, hold it in, hold it in, hold it in. But there's a generation that's like, no, we got to let it out because burnout's happening. Like all these things are affecting us. And I do think the pandemic was a time of people having to sit with feelings and thoughts and these negative emotions and not knowing they're normal, they're okay, and they can be safe. Name it. Like what you're teaching us now is exactly what I wish more people had been listening to back then, right? Just a few years ago to go, I just need to name what this is. I'm scared. I'm anxious. I'm angry, right? Like whatever it might be. And then, like you said, the next thing is like, about what? And what does it want you to do? And like walking through those steps, I think is so powerful. So I love that you kind of gave the like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? But if you're listening, recognize the generational piece to this that has kind of made negative emotions not normal, not good. There must be something wrong with you if you're a very angry person. I worked with a client today. We were talking about her anxiety and then her son's anxiety. And I said, well, anxiety is a genetic trait. Well, I think it's something else. Like she really wanted to remove it from that. And I said, it can be both, right? Nature and nurture. It can be both. But it's just this piece of like understanding that we will never be able to fully fathom that some of the negative emotions and how we respond is generationally passed down to us. It's just so there that it's become normal. Like we just don't talk about it. Secrets, things like this, right? So just swallow up your emotions, implode rather than explode. It really becomes, in its own way, the biggest detriment of families, to not be able to have a safe space to show those emotions and even relationships. So go ahead.
That generational thing too. I'm a stepmother. We were all gathered in the living room, and we were looking through one of my husband's photo albums, and it was of his mother's wedding day. And we're flipping through the pictures and having a great time. And Caitlin, who was probably 8 at the time, was standing at the top of the stairs. The tears were streaming down her face. And I went up and I said, "What's the matter?" Took her into her bedroom, sat down, put my arms around her, said, "What's the matter?" She said, "My grandmother died before I was born. I'll never get to know her." And I said, "You're really sad, aren't you?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "It's okay to be sad. This is something that you missed. You aren't going to get to know this woman that you call your grandmother. And that's a sad thing." So you're right about it. It can even go down to our young ones in terms of, here's a grandmother she never knew.
Yep.
Generational. here she is as a little 8-year-old. So it can go in that way as well. Her just thinking about a grandmother she was never going to see or touch or hold.
Right. Right.
And she was sad about it.
And how beautiful that you saw her crying there, because had nobody seen her crying there, it would be this like, I'll just hold this in. This is mine. I'm not going to show this. I'm not going to let them see that I'm crying kind of thing, right? Like it's sort of, if nobody sees it in that younger generation, sometimes they don't say it. They don't talk about it because they think it's, oh, like I shouldn't cry about this and never met her. I don't know her kind of thing. But it's like, no, you normalized it for her. So I think that's beautiful. And I'm sure listeners are thinking about their own stories like that, where it's like, wow, I was emotional and wasn't supported, or maybe were supported, right? And you're seeing the value in it. So it's almost like us having to parent ourselves, right? And go, feel this.
And when you bring up, one of the things that I've done with clients is if they're talking about something that's really, really stressful, really, really deep, an unmet need from childhood, whatever the feeling that's associated with it, I'll have them close their eyes and I'll ask them to go back in time and to see if they can recall and picture when that feeling originated. How old were they? What were they doing? And when they're in that and they're ready, I'll ask them to tell me about it. And they will. They can remember an exact experience where they took on what you and I would call an unhealthy way of dealing with one of the things that happened to them. So then I'll ask them to close their eyes and to go back. And when they can really visualize, to hold up their hands so I know they're there, I will say, now, what I want you to do is keep the little girl in your vision, and you, the person that you are, your age, I want you to be there with her. And when you can see those two people together, I want the big you to tell the little you what the little you needed to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so many times, folks will then respond and tell me that they said exactly the right thing. That they bent over and they scooped up this little one of them and just held them. So giving people the idea that even though you may not have gotten it in childhood, you, as the person now, can take care of that little child by doing what you just did.
Definitely. That's the power of visualization. I think it's underused, but when we visualize, our brain doesn't always know the difference between the reality and the vision can create the healing. So I love that you shared that technique. I use that one too, and I love it because it just really is quite powerful and emotional as the one watching it, because you can see it start to shift and you're like, whoa, it's quite powerful to witness, and for the person doing it. And so I stand by that tool as well. I think that's a really powerful one. Yvonne, you've shared some amazing insights, some really great tools, some good questions for us to ask ourselves. And I really hope that the listeners will go back and listen to the beginning and write those down, because they really were quite powerful. If someone wants to connect with you after this episode and ask you more questions, where can they find you?
They can find me via email, and it's fairly simple. It's Yvonne Author 4, all lowercase, the number 4, at gmail.com. They can also find me on LinkedIn if they want to connect that way. If they Google Yvonne Caputo and Ingenium Books, they will find the website where my books are listed. But probably the easiest way to connect with me is the email, the Yvonne Author 4 at gmail.com.
Perfect. I will make sure all of those links and the email are in the show notes, because I have a feeling you're going to have some questions after this episode and go, oh, okay, well, how do we do with this? Or what about this? And use her as a resource and a tool in going deeper as you explore how your negative emotions really can help you, how they can be those stop signs to support you in being safer with the emotions and reactions that you have. So, Yvonne, thank you for being here and just sharing with us. It really has meant a lot.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
And dear listener, here's to finding our balance code. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Take a moment to leave a rating and a review on your favorite podcast platform. That helps other listeners just like you to find this podcast too. Want to connect and learn how we can work together? Check out the links in the show notes below. Discovering your balance code doesn't have to be a one-person journey. You can have a team, and I'd love to support you. So here's to finding our balance code.